Hello, my lovely anatomists. Michele Glass here. Welcome back to another video on urinary system. And our job for this video is to look at the details of the kidney. So let's get started. So taking a look here, we do see that the outer portion of the kidney is surrounded by a renal capsule. And then next layer we have right here would be the renal cortex. And so we've seen this term cortex used before to talk about that outermost layer of the organ. The middle layer of the kidney is, of course, called the renal medulla. Now notice here that the renal medulla is organized into these somewhat triangular shaped structures, and each one of these triangular shaped structures is referred to as a pyramid. So you have renal pyramids that make up collectively the whole renal medulla. When we look at the renal pyramid, we have this sort of pointed part, and we call that portion of the renal pyramid the renal papilla. So this pointed part of the renal pyramid is called the renal papilla. In between your renal pyramids, we have a layer of tissue that's referred to as the renal column. And then what we'll see is this whole section of cortex and renal pyramid is called a renal lobe. So renal lobe is this section of cortex and pyramid. Okay. Now we're going to be looking at these kidney tubules a little bit more up close and personal here. So we'll be able to see that better on this part of the model. So what we're going to see is we have the nephron, we have the collecting duct, and then we have what's called the papillary duct. The papillary duct feeds into what are described as minor calyxes. That would be plural, or a minor calyx. The minor calyx will feed into a major calyx. And so we have major calyxes. The major calyxes feed into the renal pelvis, and the renal pelvis becomes continuous with the ureter, which we saw labeled on an earlier video. Okay, so the next thing we'd like to look at are the arteries that feed into the kidney. Remember, your arteries are represented by the color red, so we are going to be looking at those vessels that are red. So to start out, we have the renal artery. As it comes in, it separates into what are called segmental arteries. The segmental arteries divide into what are called the interlobar arteries. So we see these in between the kidney lobes, interlobar arteries. The interlobar arteries become continuous. So here's interlobar artery, of course, in red, becoming continuous here with what's called the arcuate artery. So we can see that here. We can see these kind of at that base of the pyramid, the big rounded portion. The arcuate arteries divide and become what are called cortical, as in cortex, cortical radiate arteries. And the cortical radiate arteries, we will see, have the glomerulus coming right off of that. So over here on this model, paying attention just to the blood vessels, right here we'd have the interlobar artery. Right here, we would have the arcuate artery, and right here, we would have the cortical radiate artery, and then we can see here the glomerulus. which is what this part of the model is focusing in on here. This is the glomerulus. And we see that from the cortical radiate artery, we get the afferent artery coming into the glomerulus, and then the efferent artery is leaving. So I called it an artery, and I should say arterial. So we have the afferent arterial leading to the glomerulus, which is the capillary bed, and then we have the efferent arterial, which is leaving. As the blood is leaving the efferent arterial, what we'll see is that it'll feed into what's called the the peritubular capillary bed. And so the peritubular capillary bed is actually going to be positioned around the nephron, the kidney tubules here. From the peritubular capillary bed, we would have venules feeding into the cortical, again, we're in the cortex, cortical radiate vein. So we're looking at the blue vessels, we're looking at the vein. From the cortical radiate vein, the blood moves into the arcuate vein and then into the interlobar vein. So here we're seeing the cortical radiate vein, we're seeing the arcuate vein, we're seeing the interlobar vein, and then that's going to feed into right here the renal vein. Now where the renal artery and the renal vein and the ureter come into the kidney, we're going to call that part of the kidney the hilum. So next we want to take a closer look at that nephron, which we've studied as part of our lecture work. So we have this whole structure right here as the nephron. We see the renal corpuscle includes the glomerulus and the renal capsule. From there, the fluid moves into what's called the proximal convoluted tubule, or the PCT. And then we have the descending limb of the nephron loop and the ascending limb of the nephron loop. And sometimes you'll see this referred to as the loop of Henle. Sometimes I will do that. That's how I was trained. Okay, so from the renal corpuscle, which includes the glomerulus and the renal capsule, we have the proximal convoluted tubule, or PCT, going down the descending nephron loop, going up the ascending nephron loop, and then getting here to what is called the distal convoluted tubule, or DCT. Remember, the term convoluted, according to Michele Glass' dictionary, is twisty-turny, and so we can really see that represented here. The DCT is going to feed into the collecting duct, and remember, that's the point when the fluid is really finished and considered to be urine, and the collecting duct then feeds into that papillary duct, which of course then goes into the minor calyx, major calyx, renal pelvis, and out the ureter. If we take a closer look here, what we're actually looking at up close and personal is the renal corpuscle. So here we see the glomerulus is the capillary bed. Here we see the renal capsule as the part of the kidney or part of the nephron where filtration takes place. We've already talked about the afferent arterial bringing the blood in. The efferent arterial is the exit. The fluid that gets filtered out of the glomerulus here is going to then enter into what's called the proximal convoluted tubule, so that's what we see here. Now, taking a look back at this picture, we've traced through our nephron, but look at how that distal convoluted tubule turns back toward the renal corpuscle. And so right here, what you're actually seeing right here is that DCT, or distal convoluted tubule. This special group of cells right here is called the juxtaglomerular complex. These are those endocrine cells that are releasing renin and erythropoietin. So they're going to be important in helping to detect blood pressure, and then also responding as needed. All right, y'all, that should be it for urinary system instruction. Please stay tuned for some practice videos. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.